Uh-oh. Hey there. So today I'm going to go through how I transfer beer from my GrainFather Conical Fermenter to a keg inside my kegerator using the GrainFather Pressure Transfer Kit. Now you can use this kit one of two ways. You can either pressure transfer out the bottom of the fermenter using the dual valve, or you can pressure transfer out the top of the fermenter using the stainless steel racking pipe. However way you choose it, it's got a backbeat, you can't lose it. However way you choose it, it comes with two different caps. One with a hole for the racking pipe, and the other is just a straight cap you can screw on top. Comes with a digital pressure gauge, a needle valve connection, CO2 line, some beer rack tubing, and a tri-clamp and a seal. Now the purpose of these is to connect the pressure transfer kit to the airlock hole at the top of the GrainFather Conical Fermenter. Now let me go through some of the benefits of using a pressure transfer system. Don't touch that dial. So there's several reasons why I decided to go with a pressure transfer system. Less chance of oxygen getting into the beer during the transfer process because everything is sealed. I don't have to lift the fermenter and put it on a table and do a gravity feed through the dual valve down into the keg. Have you ever tried to lift a full fermenter and put it on a table? I don't have to lift the full kegs and put them into the kegerator because they're already sitting there. I can fill up via the liquid dip tube, which pushes the air up into the top. But most importantly, I don't have to deal with those stupid siphon tubes anymore that always had a mind of their own and were always attracted to some unsanitized area. So from a mental well-being perspective, as well as a double hernia perspective, I couldn't wait to use the pressure transfer system. Now, let's go through a short design review of the GrainFather Pressure Transfer Kit. So, here are some observations and lessons learned on the design of the GrainFather Pressure Transfer Kit. This is the CO2 line that comes with the kit. It's got an inner diameter of 3/16, which will require you to step up in size when you want to connect it to the regulator or CO2 manifold. However, the outer diameter of the line fits nicely into a 5/16 inner diameter CO2 tube. Use a compression insert and a hose clamp. It'll fit nice and snug with no leaks. This is the digital pressure gauge. You push the on button and a light comes on to show you the numbers on the display. That light will shut off after 10 seconds due to an automatic shut-off feature to save on battery life. That can be annoying when you're trying to transfer beer and pay attention to the numbers. Do not push the on button to turn the light back on. Push the function button, the light will turn on. If you push it once, it won't change the function on the display. You can see the digital pressure gauge has a very close proximity to the housing assembly. And when you're trying to attach the housing assembly to the conical fermenter using the tri-clamp, it can get challenging. In fact, there may be some swear words, but that's okay, as long as there's nobody else in the room. Anyway, my advice, take the housing assembly, put it on top of the airlock hole on the conical fermenter, and then very carefully position the tri-clamp assembly so that you can tighten it on the left-hand side of the housing assembly. Now, I've seen some reviews that say they would like to see a pressure relief valve so you don't overpressurize the conical fermenter. That would be nice. Certainly would give the operator peace of mind. However, if you pay attention to the pressure on the regulator and pay attention to the pressure on the digital pressure gauge, you'll be okay. You'll be okay. What could go wrong? Anyway, there's no gradients on the racking pipe. So you don't know when you've reached the depth where this touches the racking tube on the conical fermenter. That would have been nice to have some gradients, but I went through a process in order to determine the depth, and then I put a piece of black tape there to mark it. I'll go through that process in a minute. The last thing I want to talk about is warranty. Grainfather has excellent warranty on all of its products, and they have an even better support team. Now, I didn't get paid to say that, unfortunately, but I had a problem when I first bought this where only half of the numbers were showing on the display, and I contacted the support team at Grainfather, and they were excellent with their response. So a big shout out to Abby, Nat, and Jade. Great job, guys. So there's a couple of setup procedures that I needed to do before I could start using the pressure transfer kit. One is I had to find out the depth of the racking pipe inside the fermenter where it's just above the racking tube that's inside the fermenter. The way I did this is I took the lid off the fermenter and I placed the pipe on top of the racking tube. Now this is a bit of a balancing act. It's going to take some finesse, so I recommend using a piece of tape to secure the pipe to the tube. I then put the lid back onto the fermenter and then lowered the housing very carefully onto the racking pipe. And then put the silicone gasket onto the pipe and then the cap and secured that to the housing. Now, just above the cap, I put my piece of black tape, and this is the maximum amount of depth that I want to be into the fermenter during the beer transfer process. So stay tuned, and I'll show you an optional way to do this setup procedure. There is another way to establish the depth of the racking pipe into the fermenter, and that's during the pressurization process. So while we're on the subject, if this is the first time you're using the Grainfather Pressure Transfer Kit, I highly recommend doing several test runs with water instead of beer from your fermenter into a keg or into a bucket. That way you get acclimated to the process. And if you're doing that, you might as well establish the depth of the racking pipe at the same time. So here's what you do. Put one end of the hose onto the racking pipe and the other end into a bucket. Raise the racking pipe so that it's about 12 inches above the top of the cap. Secure the cap. Put enough water into the fermenter so you're about 2 or 3 inches above the racking tube inside the fermenter. Do your normal setup procedure for pressurization. Turn on your CO2. And you'll start to hear a hissing sound as the CO2 is coming through the hose and into the bucket. Loosen the cap just a little bit and then lower the racking pipe down into the fermenter until the hissing stops and you see water starting to come up out of the top of the racking pipe. Secure your cap, shut off your CO2, and then mark your racking pipe at that point. Now, before we get started on the pressure transfer process, here's a list of the equipment that I'll be using. The Grainfather Conical Fermenter, the Grainfather Pressure Transfer Kit, a Bouncer Mech Daddy, MD for short, a 1/2 inch NPT to 3/8 inch barb shutoff valve, a ball lock coupling, a party tap connected to a short beer line and a ball lock, an open-ended gas ball lock with a blow-off tube, some 5/16 by 1/2 inch silicone tubing, and some star sand diluted in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. Now, these items can all be found on either Amazon or the Grainfather website. I'll include links in the description section of the video as to where you can get them. Next, I need to sanitize my equipment. All right, it's beer racking day. Yay! First thing I like to do is sanitize my equipment and anywhere the beer is going to be touching a surface. I sanitize my ball locks and my keg lid, and I fill my keg about halfway with star sand. Now the reason I do that is because I want to take the opportunity to sanitize my beer lines and my beer taps at the same time. I install the ball locks and the keg lid, and then I slosh the star sand around inside the keg to sanitize all the surfaces inside the keg. Nice sloshing. Next, I connect the CO2 to the keg and I fill it with about 3 to 5 psi and I sanitize my beer lines and my taps. By the way, this also sanitizes the inside of the liquid dip tube inside the keg. I install the shutoff valve to the input of the Bouncer MD, and then I connect a 5/16 inner diameter hose between the Grainfather Pressure Transfer racking pipe and the shutoff valve on the Bouncer MD. Now, as a side note, installing the shutoff valve is optional. I just wanted the ability to stop the pressure transfer if I had an emergency such as a broken hose or something like that. When I use the dual valve sample port at the bottom of the GrainFather Conical Fermenter to pressure transfer my beer, I can use the sample port shutoff valve if I need to interrupt the transfer process. I then connect the racking hose to the output of the Bouncer MD. And at this point, I'll make a determination to install either the red, white, or blue mesh screen in the Bouncer MD canister. And that really depends upon how much debris I anticipate in the beer. I then put the racking pipe and the Bouncer MD into a bucket, and I connect the racking hose ball lock onto the keg. As the Star San discharges from the keg, it sanitizes the ball lock, the racking hose, the Bouncer MD, the shutoff valve, and the racking pipe. And at the same time, I spray the outside of the racking pipe with Star San, and I put the Pressure Transfer Kit's silicone gasket and ball lock coupler into the bucket of Star San. After all the Star San is discharged from the keg, the CO2 will bubble up inside the bucket. At this point, I remove the liquid ball lock and gas ball lock from the keg and pull up on the pressure release ring to discharge the pressure inside the keg. This will leave a layer of heavier than air CO2 at the bottom of the keg. So next, I put the keg into the kegerator, and then I install the open-ended gas ball lock with the blow-off tube onto the keg's gas ball lock post and put the other end of the blow-off tube into a pitcher. I unscrew the canister from the Bouncer MD, dump out the Star San, and then reinstall the canister. Then I spray some Star San around the airlock, and I remove the silicone stopper and the airlock from the top of the GrainFather Conical Fermenter. I remove the pressure transfer silicone gasket from the bucket of Star San, give it another spray, and place the sanitized gasket onto the fermenter's top ferrule. Next, I remove the pressure transfer assembly from the bucket, insert the racking pipe into the top of the fermenter, and secure the housing to the fermenter with the tri-clamp. Now, I installed a couple of mounting brackets just above the GrainFather Conical Fermenter so that the Bouncer MD canister is suspended, and I can remove and reinstall the canister in the event the mesh screen gets clogged and needs to be cleaned, or I want to change the screen color. Now before we get started, you're going to see me use a control panel for a scale that's inside my kegerator. If you want to see my video on how to take a postal and shipping scale and turn it into a beer scale that will show you the number of pours remaining in a keg, just click on the link below. So, I push the tare button on the control panel. That zeroes out the weight of the keg inside my kegerator. I then make sure my needle valve is completely closed by turning it fully clockwise. I then set my regulator to 2 to 3 psi, and I shut off all the valves on my manifold. I then open up the valve connecting the CO2 line to the needle valve connection. Next up, pressure transferring the beer. Oh yeah. All right, are you ready to start transferring the beer? Let's get her done. First, before I transfer the beer to the keg, I like to purge the racking pipe, the Bouncer MD, and the racking tube of any trapped oxygen and Star San. I also take the opportunity to fill my hydrometer sample jar for my final gravity reading. So, I remove the ball lock coupler from the bucket of Star San, and I connect one end of the coupler to the racking tube ball lock, and the other end to the ball lock with the short tube and the party tap. I push the on button on the digital pressure gauge, turn the needle valve counterclockwise to start the flow of CO2 into the fermenter, and I pressurize the fermenter with enough CO2 to push the beer through the racking pipe, Bouncer MD, racking tube, and into the keg in the kegerator. Next, I open the party tap and flush out any Star San into a cup, and then I fill my hydrometer sample jar. At this point, any trapped oxygen has been purged from the lines, and after filling the sample jar, I remove the racking tube ball lock from the coupler. Now I'm ready to start transferring the beer. I connect the racking tube ball lock to the keg in the kegerator, keeping in mind that as soon as I install the ball lock, beer is going to start flowing from the fermenter and into the keg. I then install a spacer bar so the racking tube won't get crimped when I close the lid of the kegerator. As a side note, if the beer is not going up into the racking tube, or it partially goes up and then it stops, but you can still hear the CO2 is running, you might have a leak in your conical fermenter. The problem could be the seal around the inside of the lid. Sometimes that gets kinked when you clamp it down. The way to check it out is to shut off the CO2 with the needle valve and then release whatever pressure is left in the fermenter by loosening the cap at the top of the housing assembly. Lift up the lid and then run your finger around the inside to make sure that seal is flush. Remember to reclamp the lid before you restart your pressurization process. Alright, so let's wrap it up. As the beer is flowing through my beer racking tube into the keg, I'm monitoring the weight on my control panel. A gallon of beer is 8.3 pounds, 5 gallons is 41.5 pounds, and as the beer is being replaced inside the beer racking tube by CO2, it'll start bubbling up inside my keg. Or, I reach 41 pounds on my control panel, I'm going to remove the beer racking tube ball lock from the keg. I'll turn the needle valve in the clockwise direction to shut it off, and then I'll loosen up the cap on the top of the housing to relieve any pressure inside the fermenter. Then I'll remove the open-ended gas ball lock and replace it with a ball lock connected to my regulator. Set my regulator to 6 to 8 psi, and then pull up a few times on the pressure release valve ring, just in case there's any kind of trapped air. Aha! So here's my favorite part, the cleanup. So when cleaning the pressure transfer equipment, I like using a plastic bottle that's filled with keg cleaner and then Star San to rinse out and sanitize my ball lock, my racking tube, and my racking pipe. I bought a cheap 1.5 liter water bottle. It's made out of thin plastic, so it will contract as the solution's being drained. So here's what I did. Strip the insides out of a ball lock post, drill a hole in the top of the cap, and install the ball lock post with a washer and nut. Fill the inside of the plastic bottle with your favorite keg cleaner. Remove the cap on the ball lock and remove the spring and plunger. Put them in a cup of Star San and then screw the cap back on. Install the ball lock onto the plastic bottle. Put the end of the racking pipe into a bucket and turn the plastic bottle upside down. The keg cleaner will clean the ball lock, racking tube, and racking pipe. Then repeat the process with Star San to rinse out the cleaner and sanitize the equipment. Well, that concludes my video on how to transfer beer from the Grainfather Conical Fermenter to a keg sitting in the kegerator using the Grainfather Pressure Transfer Kit. If you have any comments or questions, well, we're waiting. Let me know.